more love, more joy, everything.
It's inspired young people.
Inspiration comes from within you. When you clear out the garbage that's in your mind, you then create space for something better, more beautiful to come in.
Let's have life and have it more abundantly.
I say yes.
It's like taking a workshop. I get to be in my pajamas.
We have a very active imagination, which is why it's important to learn how to harness it and then point it in the direction you want to go.
I listen to your show every day.
It's time now for Living Your Inspired Life with Susan Burrell. Susan is no-nonsense, inspirational, motivational, and fun.
This is positive talk radio.
Practical wisdom for everyday life.
It's a gift you give yourself.
Now, here's Susan.
And welcome to Living Your Inspired Life. You're listening to News Talk 1590 KVTA, and we on Living Your Inspired Life are all about the leading edge of consciousness, and whether it's how you live your life personally or how you interact in your business or your relationship or with the environment. It's all about conscious awareness and how do we develop that. And so we have been the past few weeks doing shows with filmmakers that are participating in a brand new festival that's happening in Santa Barbara next week on October 27th through the 30th. It's called Awakened World International Film Festival and Retreat. And we've been having these amazing conversations with some really awesome, inspiring people that have been making films to awaken the world. So if you've missed anything, go to livingyourinspiredlife.org so you can tune in, tune up, and develop your power perspective. So today I have a director, producer, a filmmaker who did a film that is celebrating its 10-year anniversary. The film is What the Bleep Do We Know? And I want to welcome today Will Arntz. Will, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
So this is a 10-year anniversary, and the film is going to be showing at the Awakened World Film Festival on October 9th in the evening as a celebration for the 10-year anniversary. But as we were talking before we went on air, I have been so thrilled. I remember when this film came out, I went to, and it was in theaters, and I went to theaters. I had a students that I took. I must have gone like 5 times, Will, to see this movie. And every time I was so excited, I got chills. I'm like, yes, this is what is the truth. This is what's happening. And then I have to say, I saw people that left. They didn't understand the movie. So I want us to talk about what the movie's about to refresh people that have seen it. And for those of you out there that haven't seen What the Bleep Do We Know, I think it's well worth a viewing. So if you would start us off, Will, what is the movie about?
Happy to, but first I'm going to say you said October 9th. I think you meant October 29th.
October 29th. Thank you.
There we go. Okay. Good. So what's the movie about? Oh, boy. I've been trying for years to boil it down to a paragraph. I still haven't succeeded, so I'll just start talking and see where we go.
Perfect.
The film, it's about 3 or 4 things, and they are all somewhat interwoven, which is why someone can go 5 times to the movie and not be bored. There's one of the things that we talk about is science, and really it's the sort of science that is not your normal science, like how far does the ball roll down the hill, that sort of physics. It's more about the quantum physics and the physics that really stretches our minds about what reality really is. So there's this whole thing about what is reality. And for instance, we interviewed some quantum physicists. And in the world of quantum, things are not at all like they are in our world. Nothing's very definite. There's this thing called the Heisenberg uncertainty principle that says you can never exactly know the position and momentum of a particle. Now you think, well, wait a minute. If I measure it close enough, I should be able to find exactly where it is. And this says no. The universe is structured so that you'll never know. And it's like, that's weird. So we talk about a lot of this quantum physics with the idea of suggesting to people like, look, we all have our perceptions of the world. People call it a worldview. And the way the world is, but that is just your assumption about the way the world is. The world is actually quite different than than what you think it is. So we talk about that on the level of quantum physics.
Well,
But then
can I tap on that? Because the thing that I loved about the movie is, and the thing I love about when you study quantum physics is it becomes this arena or awakening within you that you are self-responsible, that we as individuals, things don't necessarily happen to us. We are participators in the way our lives happen. And that was the thing that, for me, the first time I saw the movie, was exciting because I didn't like the idea of being a victim or being done unto.
Mm-hmm.
And go ahead.
Yeah, the one of the things about quantum I think you're referring to is that, again, we think our perception of the world is I'm inside me, and everything happens out there. And there's no real connection unless I, do something to it. And what the quantum physics says is, no, just your observing something changes it. And that's the thing you're saying, that you're connected to everything around you in a very basic way. Even though it looks like we're separate, quantum physics says, no, we're not really separate. It just looks that way to us.
So let's talk a little bit about this observer thing, because I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday who was saying, I have these intuitive feelings, but I don't know what to do with them. And I was saying to her that that's part of how you become the observer in your life, by listening to what those intuitive feelings are, or those intuitive thoughts may be, but watching what happens as you pay attention to them. And it becomes that field of possibility, instead of thinking my life is just this way. When, like, for instance, in this person's life, when she listens to her gut feeling, or those gut ideas of, wow, I don't think I should do that, then the other possibilities open up of, well, what else can I do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the observer, then, how do we get to that observer place within our lives, Will? Sorry.
That's That's, how do you get to the observer place? I did an interview just yesterday or 2 days ago, where we really got into someone saying it's the same thing, like, how do you ever change? And I was saying, well, the way you change, at least for me, is first you start living in the observer. And also, some people call it the silent watcher, and the religious people call it the soul. There's just a lot of different terms for this part. That there's like a part of it that's always watching, silently watching what we do. And how do you get to it? Well, it's like, in the end, it's like playing the piano. If you want to get good at the piano, you start with scales. So if you want to get good at living in the observer, you just have to start practicing it. And there's little moments, like right now we can say, okay, everyone, just observe where you are. What chair are you sitting in? What do your clothes feel like on your body? Just start observing from a silent, non-judgmental, you're not evaluating or analyzing, you're just observing. And it's something that you learn, that you practice. So how do you do it? It's first off, you got to want to do it. And, maybe we can convince you that it might be a good idea to try. And then you just start practicing it. And then there are these moments where you start observing things. And like, let's say you're someone who has a lot of anger. And whenever someone cuts you off on the highway, you want to, run them off the road. But afterwards, you start noticing that, like, after you have your emotional outburst, you just feel bad for hours afterwards, which your observer is telling you, well, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. And so by observing, staying in the observer, you start realizing, oh, I feel my blood pressure rising. I'm about ready to have an outburst. Do I want to do that or not? So for me, that's how I think of the observer. And like I said, you just got to practice.
Something that was interesting in the film, What the Bleep, that I had not heard of before now was, and I use it now as a teachable moment all the time, was the idea of the ships on the horizon coming to the, that were coming to America, I guess. And, but the natives did not even see the ships. They had no concept of what ships were in their reality until the shaman began to just like you're saying, begin to observe, begin to watch, begin to ask the question, something's out there, but what is it, right? And then they could begin. He began to see that there were ships. He began to see those possibilities, and then the rest of the people could. I use that all the time when somebody says you can't do it that way. I'm like, really? Just because it hasn't been done that way doesn't mean we can't try that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was one of the things I was saying about how one of the things that quantum was saying, your perceptions are different. Then we got into the perceptions of humans. And actually part that didn't get in the movie that we did research on was the whole bit about how you actually see. I mean, we all think there's a little camcorder in our heads that's recording everything. And it turns out that's not a... Basically, your sight goes through 5 levels of processing before you actually get a picture. And your brain is actually putting it all together. And so if the brain doesn't really have the knowledge of something, it just throws it out as garbage. It just says, oh, this is irrelevant. So that thing about the Columbus and the ships. And by the way, people kept saying, where did you get that information from? Because I read it. It was one of those things I read it somewhere. And then it always stuck in my mind, wrote it into the movie, and then people said, well, that's not true. Where did you get the reference? And I kept looking, and finally Joe Dispenza, who's in the movie, said, actually it was Darwin said that in his Origin of the Species. He told the story.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. So, but apparently that happened, and it's really true. It's things that you just really don't want to see or can't see or don't know exist, you basically tune out. I mean, the brain just, gets the information. It just doesn't process it, which is why I think you have people who say they see auras or see other dimensions. Like, for instance, children, they're always talking to their quote-unquote imaginary friend.
Right.
And then, us good, adults come by and say stuff like, that's not real, it doesn't, get real, get a life, get a job, that kind of stuff. And then eventually they just stop seeing it. They just tune that out. But some people, there are those mystics who that doesn't happen and they still see things. And I think it's really the same thing. Our level of perception, we've sort of just scratched the surface about what human beings can really, really perceive in this universe we find ourselves.
Right. And I think that, and we talk about this on Living Your Inspired Life often, that in order to adapt or evolve, it's important to become the observer in your life, to wake up enough and trust that is part of the reason why we're here. We're not just here to have a job and make some money and buy some toys and have a life like that. We're here to expand our consciousness, and that means that we have, I'm just going to talk about me, Will, but in my life, I've had to really pay attention to those intuitive things, or those things that bring me up and go, well, what if this is possible? What if I could do that? And that's the only way that we grow. Otherwise, we're kind of stuck in that same rut. Yeah.
Yep. Otherwise, it's just, as they say, same old, same old.
Yeah, same old, same old. So, so the quantum physics component then was in the movie. It leads into some other amazing paradigms on how do we see our reality and things like that. And there was the whole section of Dr. Emoto's experiments with water, which at the time that What the Bleep came out, nobody knew about this, right? And again, that's the what if thing. And so speak a bit about that water experiment, if you would, Will.
Well, Dr. Masaru Emoto, who just passed away last week, I don't know if you knew that. Yeah, he left this world. He had these experiments where he would take water and then he would have people meditate on it, or he would have people write words on water, and then he would go ahead and freeze them, and he would take pictures of the crystals that formed. So he would have like water from this one dam that was kind of polluted in Japan, and you see the picture, it's ugly, and then he said, here's the water after it was prayed on by some Buddhist monks, and then it's a very beautiful crystal. And there were things like that where he had a bottle where he said, the chi of love on beautiful crystals. he had another bottle. He put on the words, I hate you, you're disgusting, and it was very ugly. And these were very, very, very dramatic pictures. And I know so many people who were just, that was the scene where it was just like, huh? It really got people. And that became part of the plot for Amanda, our story. I should probably tell people that are listening that basically no one knew what to call the movie because no one had ever made a movie like it. And it kind of still happened in that there was this whole documentary part where we interviewed scientists and mystics, but then there was a dramatic story. And Marlee Matlin was the actress playing Amanda in that. And so there's this whole story that goes through the movie. So the whole thing has a whole emotional arc to it. And then on top of that, there's 20 or 25 minutes of really trippy animation that goes on. And so there are these three elements of the film that are always weaving together in some way. And so no one knew what to call it. Is it a documentary? Well, not really. And then people started saying, well, it's a docudrama. No, a docudrama is when you do you kind of do a retelling of someone's story. It wasn't that. So they started calling it a hybrid movie because no one knew what that meant, and then everyone thought it was a Prius, so they started stop saying that. So anyway, but when we made the movie, there's all these very intense concepts we're talking about, but it's also very funny and entertaining because I did all this there was a whole bit in the movie about the brain and how you repattern the brain. And it turns out that, for instance, your neuroplasticity, which is the ability of the brain to learn something new, goes way up after you have a good laugh.
Makes sense to me. That makes complete sense.
Yeah, and if you're bored, and some scientist is running on and on about quantum field potential, you don't learn anything. But if you just had a really good laugh, and then someone goes into this, you really take it in. So part of the film is very entertaining. Parts of it are funny. Parts of it are very poignant. And so the film itself is this, people, what the bleep do we know? They didn't know what to call it. So
I love that title. I gotta say, that title is brilliant.
Well, the way the title came about, people are curious about that, is Mark and I started the movie, and then after a while, I realized I needed help, and I brought in Mark Vicente, and then we kept developing it further, and then he realized we needed help, and finally we brought in Betsy Chassie, the third filmmaker. And Betsy had no previous experience in anything of this metaphysical or spiritual or anything. And at first, I thought, oh, boy, that's not very good. It turns out it was a blessing in disguise. So she was very practical.
Yeah.
She would always say, like, well, you guys are going on and on about this, and that just makes no sense to me, but what the do I know? Well, she used the real word.
Uh-huh.
She's not believe herself. So she kept saying that, yeah, but what the do I know? And so we took us forever to try to figure out how we were going to weave the story in with the interviews. And so after a while, Mark and I realized we didn't really get it either. So we all started saying that. And at one point, someone, I don't even remember who, said, we should just call the movie that. What the do we know?
Yeah.
And we had this big laugh. We thought, oh, that's funny. Whatever to do that. We'll come to our senses at some point. And, of course, we never did come to our senses, and that was the name of the movie. But I liked it because it's part of it is we didn't want to come across as like, okay, we're the experts, we're going to tell you the way it is, and here's how you should live your life, which, sometimes you see in, like, the self-help movement, you get these, the pundits who are like, I know everything and you know nothing.
Right.
And we're like, well, what the bleep do we know? I mean, there's some stuff we do know, but, you really have to decide for yourself whether this is right. You have to decide for yourself whether it's something you want to try. And if you want to try, you have to decide for yourself. But we talk a lot about creating reality, how you create your reality. So it's like, just start with the assumption that you do create your reality and see how your life changes. And if you like that, well, then, go get them. So that was kind of the thought behind it.
And the thing about the movie for me is it opens doors to more questions that you can ponder within yourself. I like that it isn't, this is the way it is, like you were saying, this is the way it is, we have the answer, and you better find our answer. What I loved, especially when you had some of the philosophers and spiritual people speak, that it wasn't about, no, this is what I believe and you should believe it, but the what if, it goes beyond what we thought.
I was very careful about that because I've never really liked, that dogmatic sort of, here's the rule book and you got to live by it. So, very careful to, just like you said, just suggest things. There was a whole section early on, and we called it the Great Question section, where there was just people just asking questions. What about this? Why are we here? What's this all about? Can I change my, those sort of questions that, you're not going to buy a book and get the answer and then it's answered for all times. I mean, humanity has been asking these great questions for millennia. And, I think often in our current world where science is coming up with all these explanations and there's always some expert on the TV, you think, all the questions have been answered. And it's like, no, the great questions, you take a lifetime and ponder them. That gives a certain richness to them.
Well, and that's when you get to see that there's other boats on the horizon, right, that you haven't even seen before.
Yeah, good one, yeah.
One of the things that, and I forget who it was in the movie, said that, but it hooked me, it caught my attention, was modern materialism and religion have stripped people of responsibility, of self-responsibility. And that just I went boing, I was like, yeah, that feels like truth, because so many people are in the quest for materialism that they aren't seeing how it's affecting our environment, or it's affecting their relationship with their family and friends, or stuff like that, or their stress, their health level, and I would say religion has done the same thing, where people that are in the let me do it by the book kind of religion, they abdicate their choice in so many ways. Mm-hmm. And that's too bad, because then how do we as a human species, as humankind, evolve into whatever it is? I think that's why we see the state of the world right now. That's my personal opinion, is because people have just abdicated responsibility and they want to leave it to the leaders or the sects that are doing it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I also agree with you. That's the whole thing. We did sort of a quasi follow-up movie to what we go down the rabbit hole, but we got much more into science and talked a lot more about the materialism and how that really affects things. And because the current scientific worldview right now, they call it scientific materialism, is that basically, hey everyone, the world is as you see it. There's nothing more than the physical world. If you think there's anything beyond the 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time and matter and energy, you're smoking something. So this is all there is, and that's the end of it. And to the point that if you're a professor somewhere in physics, and you start talking about other dimensions, or you use the G word, God, or you say, I saw an angel, you'll get ostracized and conceivably thrown out. I mean, there's a real dogmatic thing going on in the scientific community about scientific materialism. This is all there is, which to me is so humanly arrogant to say that the universe is defined by our 5 senses. I mean, it's like, come on, people.
I agree with you, Will. I do feel like it's arrogance. We are such a small little bleep in the universe, really, because it's so beyond our comprehension, which I personally am beginning to really find fascinating. Instead of going, oh, here's the box I live in, I'm enjoying finding where the box can be opened and there are no separation walls, and the exploration within myself and in the conversation with others like you is, well, what if there's this other thing? And I think that's the fun part of life, personally.
Mm-hmm. It's funny you said, we're just this little bleep in the universe. I interviewed interviewed one person for down the rabbit hole, and they said, well, we're about ready to find out whether humanity was a great movement of nature or whether it was just a mistake and nature will eliminate it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can feel that.
Yeah, it's kind of true. I mean, we all know what we're doing. Well, we don't all know, but it's pretty obvious what we're doing to the environment, and all the stuff.
Yeah, I had a conversation with somebody the other day, and his excitement was about the what if we could do something different with our fuel sources, and I kept thinking, and he goes, and then we could save we could save the world, and I thought, yeah, that could be part of what adds to quote unquote saving the world, but there's so much more that goes beyond that one solution that still needs to be looked into and investigated and explored for us, as humanity, to continue to thrive and heal and change.
But that's a whole other show right there. It's like right now we're in the phase of science run amok.
Yeah.
Science just going crazy, and the whole thing is like, just because we can do something, should we do something?
Oh yeah, there's an ethical question, eh?
Well, it's pretty obvious actually. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, because I did some research. I grew up in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Lancaster County is known for the Amish.
Mm-hmm.
And I read this article once where someone was talking to one of the elders, and they said, well, you people are just against technology. And the elder goes, oh, no, we're not. No, we're not. That's a misconception. What we say is we think we should consciously decide how far to let technology into our lives and whether it fits with our core values. So, for instance, one of our core values is the family. So the idea that there would be a telephone, someone could call and interrupt our dinner when the family's together, is abhorrent to us. That clashes with our core values. But there's other things, like we started noticing, the elder said, there's always a couple families who push the boundaries. And so we just watch them. And we noticed people started getting these propane barbecue things, putting on their back porch. So we kind of watched, and we just noticed that when we had this, people would come over and gather, and they would spend more time together, and they would laugh, and they'd play croquet out in the backyard. And we realized that increased our core values of what we find important. So now that's okay to have that.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, boy, and we think the Amish are so backwards, but they consciously decide how far to let the technology into their life.
Mm-hmm. And
now,
that's huge.
Isn't that huge? And then you look at our society now, where basically you can't have a dinner with someone. If there's 4 people at the dinner table, you're out to a restaurant, someone's going to be whipping out their cell phone, someone's going to be texting, someone's, it's such an invasion of technology, and no one ever stops to think, well, do we want to let it that far into our lives? And I think that awareness eventually, I think, will come about, but don't hold your breath.
Yeah. I know we have become addicted to technology now, and it's become the common ground for many people, is to talk about the technology as opposed to their interpersonal reality. So let's talk briefly about, you just mentioned Down the Rabbit Hole. Tell everybody what that is.
Well, we finished, What the Bleep was out there, and it was about almost a 2-hour movie. And people kept hounding us, oh, this is great, we want more information, we want to know more of the science, we want to know how science has progressed, and more. And at that point, I was sitting on 50 hours worth of unused interviews. And then basically we had an opportunity to re-interview everyone who was in the original movie, plus a couple extra ones. And so we re-interviewed everyone. So now I have 100 hours worth of these great interviews. People are bugging us for, more and more information. So what I did was I took the original movie and yanked out basically all the interviews and put in a whole batch of new interviews talking about the same subjects in general, but it was in more depth. And we added a couple things and did some new animation and put it all together. So but the dramatic story with Amanda was still more or less there. So people would watch it, but now it's 2.5 hours long, go down the rabbit hole. And the reason we call it that, there's a scene on the basketball court in the original movie where this kid asks Amanda, the heroine, how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go? And so this is taking people down the rabbit hole, and it's just a lot more depth. The funny thing was, people said, well, is it a sequel? It's like, well, no, it's not a sequel because the dramatic story is sort of the same. Well, is it a director's cut? Well, it's not really that because most of it is actually new. So it's not a sequel. It's not a director's cut. What is it? And we never did, just like, what do you call the original movie? Is it a hybrid? Not really.
Right.
So it's for people really who are interested in the concepts of the original movie. It's a much, much further inquiry into everything. And we just released this was in print for a while, then went out of print. We have a new distributor, did a 4 DVD set now. And so we have this 2.5 hour down the rabbit hole. And then I got really carried away, and I decided to make a 5-hour version of the film where you really go into depth. So when you're talking in physics about wave-particle duality, there's a lot more talking about that in illustrations and animation and whatnot. So it's kind of for those people who want more. They said, give us more, we gave them more.
Oh my God, I think that's great too that you expanded it with all the quantum physics stuff, because I was just having a conversation with a friend who was a student of mine, and she said, I finally have figured out that I need audio visual. I can't sit down and read a book. If I read a book, I fall asleep. But if I can listen or watch something, I comprehend it better. So that's great for those people that, don't want to sit down and read about quantum physics because it can be very dry. And to see it, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. And it's called What the Bleep Down the Rabbit Hole. And people can go to the website, right? whatthebleep.com to get the DVD set.
Yeah, or, you can just go to Amazon. Everything's on Amazon.
Okay.
And we also put on, for people who have already seen it, we also put on 2 featurettes, 20-minute things. And one of them was an interview with me about sort of where did What the Bleep come from, because everyone wants to know that. And I talk about how in college I was a physics major and math major and blah, blah, all that stuff. And then the other featurette's called Reflections on What the Bleep. And what happened was I went back and interviewed a few months ago a lot of the people who were in the original movie, and we asked them basically what was the impact of this movie, and what did we get right and what did we get wrong? Because again, what the bleep do we know? We didn't get it all right. And so it was people talking about some of the stuff in the film. And the film was quite controversial at the time. And they were talking about some of the things that were controversial. And that's on this 4 DVD set, too. So that for people who have seen the movie, they'll find it fascinating to hear Fred Allen Wolf talk about, the wave particle thing. And again, what we got right, what we got wrong.
Where I'm talking to Will Arntz, the producer and director of What the Bleep Do We Know. You're listening to Living Your Inspired Life. We're going to take a short break and be right back. Hi, this is Susan Burrell from Living Your Inspired Life. I always find it easier and more fun to expand my life by being connected to open-hearted, like-minded people committed to being on the same path I am. If you feel the same way, I suggest you visit a Center for Spiritual Living. There are wonderful communities in Ventura, Ojai, Santa Barbara, Oxnard, Pleasant Valley, Camarillo, and Westlake Village. You'll find terrific people, great information, and more tools to help you live the life you were born to live. So go to csl.org to find a center near you. That's csl.org for a center near you. Welcome back to Living Your Inspired Life. I'm Susan Burrell, and we're having a conversation with the producer-director of What the Bleep Do We Know, Will Arntz. And we're having this conversation because this film is celebrating its 10-year anniversary, and there is going to be a celebration in Santa Barbara on October 29th at the Libero Theater, because What the Bleep Do We Know is part of the Awaken World International Film Festival that runs from October 27th through the 30th. So, Will, thanks again for being here. And the conversation I want to get into now is the whole brain and neurosynapse connection that What the Bleep illustrates so well. Until I had seen that movie, somebody would explain it to me. I was like, yeah, but I don't get it. So the conversation of the neurosynapses and how they line up.
Well, the thing we got into, and we had some very nice animations that sort of flying through the brain. When you see the movie, you'll notice there are these neuro-nets, which is actually how the brain works. And in the movie, we fly through them. I once asked a friend of mine, a neuroscientist, if that was accurate. He laughed. He said, no, it's more, if you were accurate, it would more look like you're flying through oatmeal.
You're flying through what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oatmeal.
Oh.
Cooked oatmeal. He said that's what it looks like inside. Great. But anyway, we're flying through these things, and basically the way that the brain works is with neuro-nets. And basically, these neurons, they have these little dendrites that go out and connect to other nerve cells. And it's by connecting these patterns, these networks, that you actually have a thought. And so the thing is, like, you have a thought about what is round, and then you have a thought about what is red, and then you have a thought about some taste, and you put them all together and you start making the neuronet of an apple, which actually is connecting a bunch of other smaller neuronets. And so you build concepts up in the brain. But the thing that they've learned is Joe Dispenza says, nerve cells that fire together wire together. So when you start thinking about something over and over, every time you think about it, the nerve cells connected with that concept wire together more and more and more, which is why when you practice scales on the piano, you actually get better. Also, nerve cells that don't fire together unwind. So basically what we were telling people is like, look, if you're stuck in a pattern, it's because you keep thinking about it over and over and over again. If you, for some reason, stop thinking about it, those nerve cells that cause that will start to unwind. So it really introduces to people the distinct possibility that you can change. You can change your patterns. And basically, you can rewire the brain. The way you rewire it is by thinking the thoughts you want to think.
And boy, can that be a challenge sometimes.
Oh, well, that's a big challenge, right?
But again, and that goes back to that we are self-responsible. We are responsible for our lives and how it outpictures, because of how we're thinking about ourselves or the situation, right?
Yeah, and the brain, I mean, 40 years ago in neuroscience, they said, look, you don't get any new brain cells. Basically what you get by the time you're 25, that's the peak. They're just going to die off. And you're not going to grow new brain cells. You're not going to change. And they found all this amazing research over the last decades, especially over the last 10 years, that says, look, oh my God, the brain, it keeps making new brain cells. You completely rewire things. And they're even finding out now that your DNA, you can change your DNA. And again, when Crick and Watson came up with discovering the DNA, it was like, we've finally figured out, we have the print of the body, now we're going to figure out everything because this is the control structure. Turns out it's not the control structure, and that your mind or your brain can actually change DNA. And it's just mind-boggling that, we thought, again, 50 years ago, humans, this is the way you were, you got what you got from your parents, and, you better just accept it. And now they're finding there's all these ways in which we're very fluid beings that really we're set up to transform and change. The only thing that's limiting us is our ideas about that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And how we stay focused on. So if you stay focused on one thing, like I can't change, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
So, go ahead.
There's also a thing that I know you want to talk about in the film. There's all the thing about the brain, and then we interviewed Candace Pert, who wrote a book called The Molecules of Emotion. And she found that for any emotional state, there's really a peptide, which is a small amino acid, that docks with the cells that is responsible for the feeling of that emotion. So what she said was, well, if that's true, then you can get addicted to an emotion. If there's an emotional state you keep going back to, like some people they have this victim thing. Oh, poor me, this always happens to me, it always happens to me. And what we suggest in the film is that if you're always seeing an emotional state come up over and over again, you're probably addicted to it. Your body has gotten so used to having those chemicals of that emotion that when you don't have them, the body is like, oh, man, it's like being hungry. You want to create that. So people who are victims are probably creating the victimization because they get off on it.
That knocked me over when I reviewed the movie last night. And like I said, I've seen it a bazillion times. But that particular thing, which I'd seen, hit me in a different way yesterday, because the idea of the addiction to the emotion that you're feeling, it kind of explains a lot to me in my personal life of I've had depression on and off my life, and that kind of a thing seems to be, it's kind of like, okay, that's my comfortable place sometimes. Okay, I'm feeling really depressed. Instead of going, wow, that's now the work I've done on myself, I get that that's a choice for me now, so that it's not a necessary place to go. I don't have to have that emotion in order to work through whatever the issue is, right?
Right. Yep. And the fact that if you keep going there over and over, like personally, I had this thing where people always were telling me, oh, you can't do this. When I was making What the Bleep, my background was in physics and computers, and people were saying, you're not a filmmaker, you can't do it. And at one point I realized, and this happened all my life, people saying, oh, you can't do it. And then I realized, like, oh my God, I'm just always setting myself up for this because I'm addicted to it, because I like the feeling of proving I'm wrong. I like the feeling of like, oh, you idiots, you thought I couldn't do it. Now I did it and it was so interesting when I finally got that. After having done it for 30 years of my life, I'm like, oh my God, I'm just doing this because it motivates me and my ego gets off on it and blah, blah, blah. And once I realized that, it's never happened since. Once I realized that I was just creating this situation over and over again because I got off on it, and I finally go, oh my God, look at that. And then I thought, do I really want to play that game anymore? And it was like, no, I don't need the ego thing of proving them wrong and me right. No, I don't think so. So it just went away.
See, and I think that's so cool that we can change our brain chemistry ourselves. We don't have to go to somebody else. We don't have to outsource it.
Yep. Yeah, in the early phase, of course, outsourcing it because, often the therapist or whoever it is, your advisor, will play the role of the observer. So each person sort of learns how to do it for themselves. But, the bottom line they're learning over and over again in biology is that transformation that we're set up to change. Like I said, this thing that you can have the DNA, but given DNA can express itself in a number of different ways based on, and that's where right now biology is like, well, based on what? It can do it in a number of different ways. So why is on one hand it expressing a cancer gene and another the same DNA is not? What's the difference? And this gets very nebulous as to what it is. So, and materialistic science is having a problem because they don't have a mechanism by which one happens or the other. Now, the people who were more metaphysically inclined, who say there's other forms of energy other than the ones that we know about, the science knows about, says that it's the power of your mind and your intent that has actually changed the expression of the gene. So people who have that in their bag of tricks, they don't have a problem with just saying why the DNA can do different things. They say it's the mind, or some people would say it's the higher self, or the soul, or whatever you want to, the other part of ourself that's non-material is actually affecting the material world. And I think that's going to be the big step in civilization over the next century, would basically be realizing that there is this other dimension, call it, or this other type of energy that we haven't discovered. I mean, 200 years ago, no one knew about X-rays.
Right.
And now it's part of our lives. I mean, 200 years ago, lasers didn't exist. And now they run our supermarkets. I mean, so there's forms of energy out there that we just haven't really, that mainstream science hasn't touched yet. But there are some people who are starting to do research into these truly alternate forms of energy. And like I said, my crystal ball says that next century, that's going to be the big change.
Well, I just got to go back to the ships on the horizon again, Will, and that, we don't know what we don't know until we open up our mind to begin to ask questions and then observe it. And I also got to say, I really hope it doesn't take a century for us to get this point. I'd like to see it in the next decade or so. If we can move so quickly with the technology, I just am holding space that we can really all come together and comprehend that there is something beyond our smallness or our the way we've always seen things because science said or somebody else said this is the way it is, that we can see it for ourselves and really see that we're beyond all that.
Well, the sooner the better as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
There you go.
And there was a brief, the thing I always like, there was a brief tapping on in the movie about that we are interconnected, that there is a unity and a wholeness that is kind of the fabric of everything on the planet, including human consciousness. And I love that part. The thing about this movie, what the bleep do we know, for me, was science proving that there is a spiritual existence within us that we can investigate and align with and utilize. That was what it always said to me. And it's interesting that the whole the quantum physics and all the science, and then what you also added in Down the Rabbit Hole is more science, so that the people that need the show me, that come from the show me state, have guys, so you can show them, see, here's how it is.
Yeah, and Down the Rabbit Hole, we interviewed some people about experiments they did, basically about the mind-matter interaction. Mm-hmm. Is there really any sort of interaction? And there are these experiments that they've done with random event generators where people use their intent to basically affect a process that, according to mainstream science, cannot be affected by the mind, by just thinking about something. And there is a significant result. The thing you were talking about, the interconnection, we didn't get too much in the first What the Bleep, but we hit it very hard Down the Rabbit Hole. It's this thing called quantum entanglement.
Yes.
And entanglement, that's this weird thing of science where if you have two particles, let's say, created at the same time, they're always connected. So if you do something to one, like you flip it upside down, let's say, the other one flips upside down. And you can have these two particles on the other side of the universe, and that happens. And this is something that quantum physics says, and Einstein actually was one of the first ones who figured that out, and he presented it as a proof that quantum physics was wrong.
Oh.
He called it spooky action at a distance. He said, look, we all know that the universe can't work that way. Obviously it doesn't work that way, so therefore your quantum physics is wrong. And he had a big argument with someone, and then Bohr said, well, you're right, that's what quantum physics predicts. And so Einstein says, so therefore quantum physics must be wrong. Well, and Bohr said, well, Albert, stop telling the universe what to do. This is what the universe does. And eventually they have done experiments now where they've proven this thing called entanglement, that these particles, that there's invisible, they don't know how it works, but they are entangled. So everything, that's what they're saying, everything looks separate, but they're saying at a sub-nuclear level, everything's connected. Everything affects everything in forces that we don't even have a name for. So this is where the quantum physics really starts getting into the mystical realms. And quantum physicists, if you ask them about entanglement, they just kind of shake their head and say, well, no, we don't understand it, but we have equations that we can predict what it does, and we see it does it. As to why it does it or how it does it, we don't know. It's just the way it is.
You know, that's fascinating to me, Will. I love that component of quantum physics because it speaks to to me personally about that my thoughts. If I'm thinking, and it's in the movie too. But if I personally am thinking angry thoughts about someone, that those thoughts, if I'm in this quantum entanglement, which we all are, right? Then those thoughts are not only affecting me; they're affecting them, right? And to realize that my angry thoughts or my fearful thoughts or my sad thoughts or whatever not only affect other people but myself, and not only affect myself but affect other people, then it becomes it has pulled me up several times short to go, okay, wait, what is it I really want to be feeling, and what is it I really want to be projecting out into the world? Because I don't want to participate. This is me personally. But I don't want to participate in the anger and the fear and the stuff that keeps amping up the planet into war. If I know that I'm connected to everything else on the planet via this quantum entanglement theory, then therefore what I'm feeling and thinking, going back to the addiction of the emotions and the cells again, I guess too, but is affecting, even though I'm not actually doing something, you know, I'm not actually firing a gun, but my anger and fear about another person or a country or whatever is almost causing the same thing or fueling it. Yeah?
Yeah, well, I totally agree with you.
Well,
And in fact, that's how I live my life, is because you just realize that the hate, if you hate someone, you get couple million people hating, and then that energy is going to come out some way. And you see then extreme examples of hate, where people doing horrible things to people, and it's just they're doing it, but it's somehow we all have to take a certain amount of responsibility for that. It's a very different way to live your life.
it is a very different way, and then it goes back to our earlier conversation of, the ethical thing. Just because I can, doesn't mean I should, or just because I'm fearful of what just occurred on the other side of the planet, do I need to go there? Mentally and emotionally. The conversations I get to have with people lately. It's fascinating to talk to someone who doesn't understand these principles, because they don't really get that what they just said in a very hurtful way actually doesn't just stop with what they just said to that person. It's rebounding it back on them and then moving further out into other people's realms. And I kind of think that's why we're in the place we're in, Will.
Pretty much. I mean, I think so too. And one of the things that I sort of get into sometimes in the rabbit hole thing was this idea that we have physical laws, and so no one basically argues that gravity exists. I mean, even though it's invisible, no one ever sees gravity, but if you drop the apple, it falls down. But so we live our lives in accordance with that physical law of gravity. If you ignored gravity, you could step out of a 5-story window and nothing would happen. But you know that gravity works, you don't do that. Well, let's call them spiritual laws, or you could say metaphysical laws, or whatever, energetic laws, that are also how the universe works. And, if you do not live in accordance with those, which is what you're saying, and we see it in society and the world, if you don't live in accordance with those, then it's going to be like you stepped out of a 5-story window. And so we see in the world, I think a lot of what you see, or maybe most, or maybe all of what you see that's really screwy, is because people aren't following those subtle laws, the ethical, moral, spiritual laws of how the universe really works and how we are all connected. And if you realize we are all connected, I mean, most people don't want to cut off their arm.
Boy, Will, that sounds like another "What the Bleep Do We Know" movie that you could focus on, and I'll be right there with you, helping you.
I know. Started about a year ago. About a year ago, people started bugging me to like, okay, when's there going to be Bleep 2? When's there going to be Bleep 2? So
I get it.
I actually started working on Bleep 2. And
Yay.
I got a bunch of interviews, and I kind of realized that I didn't quite know it wasn't clear. And so right now it's in the back of my mind
Percolating.
But part of what we got into, was getting into in this Bleep too, is like Bleep went and down the rabbit hole was really focused about the science and about people's internal lives, how you can change, how you can transform. But I think Bleep 2 is much more okay. We've done that. We've focused. We know about all these techniques for transformation and whatnot. But it's time for us to come out of the meditation cave and look around the world. And if we are all connected and are responsible, you can't ignore what's happening in the outer world.
Will Arntz, I look forward to that when that comes out. We're at the end of our time. So when that comes out, I want to have you back. But I want to invite everybody to go to the Awaken World Conference on October 29th at the Libero and see this great movie, What the Bleep Do We Know? And if you can't get up to Santa Barbara, then go to the website, whatthebleep.com or Amazon, and buy the DVDs, guys. This is a really cutting-edge movie. Will, thanks so much for joining us. And I'm just going to say, and so it is, namaste.